What would you say if I told you that some of the scariest games on the internet aren't hidden because they're deleted, banned, or buried on some impossible web server, but because they feel like they were never made for you at all? I mean the games that sit quietly on itch.io, old forums, Google Drive folders, and hidden community pages waiting for someone to click on the wrong link. And today, that's the mystery we're going to solve. Why do certain horror games feel forbidden even when they're public? Why can a $5 download, a browser toy, or a Doom mod feel more dangerous than a giant studio horror release with $1 million monster? Because in the strangest corners of indie horror, the scariest question is rarely what is going to jump out at me. It's why was it left here? And the deeper you dig into these games, the more they start to feel less like stories and more like abandoned rooms where someone forgot they were cleaning up blood. The first game is Ananomy by Kitty Horror Show, and on the surface, the premise could not be simpler. You're in a house, there's cassette tapes, you walk from room to room, listening to a voice explaining the body of the domestic architecture. But almost immediately, that simplicity becomes the point. Autonomy feels forbidden because it takes the safest possible space in the world, the house, and treats it like something alive enough to resent you. At first, the house is boring. The lighting's flat, the textures are low resolution, the furniture is ordinary in an uncanny way. The horror comes from the slow realization that the house is not just a location, it's a memory machine. The bedrooms remember who slept there. The kitchens remember hunger. The basements remember what was being pushed underground. And the tapes you encounter in the game don't explain it like a lore entry in a wiki. They explain it like an autopsy, as if someone has already cut the house open and is calmly showing you where the organs should be. This is where Autonomy becomes fascinating. It's not really a haunted house game. It's a game about why haunted houses work on us in the first place. We project ourselves onto our rooms. We say a house has a face, a mouth, eyes, and a heart. We describe hallways as arteries and basements as stomachs without thinking about what those metaphorically imply. But Autonomy forces you to think about it. What if those comparisons were not poetic? What if every house is haunted because every house is built to contain human life? And anything designed to contain life will eventually learn the shape of death. The genius of the game is that it grows less stable every time you return. The familiar floor plans start to decay. Rooms become harder to trust. The audio becomes less like narration and more like infection. And by the time the house starts to feel openly hostile, the player has already done the most important thing. They learned the layout. That means the fear is not coming from an unknown place anymore. It's coming from the familiar being wrong. This is a very different kind of horror from a monster chasing you down the hallway. A monster gives you fear in the body. Autonomy refuses to do that as long as possible. Instead, it suggests that the body is the hallway. The body is the drywall. The body is the little patches of carpet you keep walking across because the game told you to find another tape. And that's what makes it feel like you were never supposed to find it. Not because it's a secret, but because it seems like a private ritual you have to stumble into after already beginning. The deeper theory here is that Autonomy is not asking whether a house can be haunted. It's asking whether living inside of something is kind of haunting. We leave impressions in spaces, we damage them, repair them, we hide things in them, and then one day we leave, while the shapes of our lives remain in the walls. Autonomy turns that idea into a nightmare, so imitating that almost feels rude to play. Next is a game called No Players Online, a game that understands one of the strongest emotions in modern gaming: joining an empty server. Anyone who's played old multiplayer shooters knows this feeling. You load into a map built for chaos, gun violence, and all this explosions, but there's no chaos anymore. No voices, no gunfire, no camping the flag. Just a scoreboard with no name on it. Hallways designed for fights that never happen. And the uneasy sense that you're not playing a game so much as visiting an empty space. That's the whole point of No Players Online. It looks like a discarded capture the flag first-person shooter from another era. Something you might find in a dusty hard drive or in a folder called old games on a school computer. But then the emptiness starts to feel intentional. The map is too quiet. The objectives are too simple. And when something finally breaks the silence, it doesn't feel like a scripted scare. It feels like someone else joined the lobby. This is where the game taps into a very specific internet fear. Online spaces are supposed to be social, but they do not die cleanly. Servers go down, forums rot, usernames become inactive, old files remain downloadable years after the community vanishes. And when you enter one of those spaces, there is always this tiny impossible hope that someone might still be there. No players online takes that hope and turns it inside out. What if someone is still there, but they're not happy you came back? The deeper mystery is not just what is haunting the server, but why the server is such a perfect ghost story vessel. A multiplayer map is a stage built for repeated human behavior. People learn the routines, hiding in corners, create rituals, develop grudges, and leave behind invisible patterns. They know the exact spots to throw grenades, all these special tips and tricks that are learned over time. Even after everyone logs off, the architecture still implies movement. A sniper nest still implies a sniper. A flag room still implies an enemy team. The absence becomes evidence of presence, and this is why no players online feels forbidden. The game understands that discovery is scarier when it feels accidental. You're not just entering a spooky mansion with a flashlight and a brave protagonist. You are clicking on old things because it looks harmless, maybe even nostalgic, and then slowly the game reframes nostalgia as a haunting. All those dead servers and abandoned lobbies from childhood were never empty. They were just waiting rooms. What makes the concept even more interesting is how it treats the player as the intruder. In most horror games, you belong in the experience because the story was made to carry you through it. Here, the opposite is true. You feel like you have bypassed something, like you have accessed the file that was meant to stay archived. The server has rules, history, and grief you don't understand. Every step towards solving it feels like a violation. And by the end, that is what the game leaves you with. The possibility that abandoned digital places are not empty objects. They hold the last match, the last message, last login, last time someone cared enough to keep them alive. No players online is ominous because it makes you wonder how many games on the internet are dead and how many of them are just pretending to be. Then there's the game I'm Scared. One of the greatest examples of horror games that refuses to stay inside the game window. On paper, it is a surreal first-person nightmare about finding keys and escaping a pixelated maze. But that description barely touches what makes it work. I'm Scared feels forbidden because it does something most games are trained never to do. It breaks the boundary between software and your real machine. The visual language is crude in the best way possible. Pixelated corridors, hard colors, empty rooms, and a constant sense that the game is loading wrong even when it's functioning exactly as intended. And then there's Whiteface, the kind of horror figure that feels less like a character and more like a corrupted file that learned to look at you. It's simple, almost childlike, but that simplicity is why it works. The less detail a monster has, the more your brain rushes to finish it and create it in your mind. But the real fear of I'm Scared is not the white face appearing in the hallway. It is the moment the game acknowledges the world outside itself. Files appear, messages are left behind, instructions ask you to do things that feel just slightly too personal. Suddenly, the game is not just being played by you, it is communicating with your operating system, your desktop, your sense of control. That's the key. Most horror games threaten the avatar. I'm Scared threatens the player's comfort with the machine. It reminds you that every game is, at the end of the day, a program with permissions to run on your computer. Obviously, I'm Scared is not actually malicious, but emotionally, it borrows the language of malware. haunted downloads, and creepypasta executables. It makes you feel like you should not have opened it, even though opening it is the only way to continue. And the theory can go surprisingly deep here, because I'm Scared is about consent in a strange digital way. You agreed to play a horror game, but did you agree for it to speak outside of the window? Did you agree for it to create evidence in your files? Did you agree for the entity to know that you can quit and come back? That last point matters because quitting is usually the player's ultimate safety tool. I'm Scared turns quitting into part of a ritual. What makes it feel like you were never supposed to find it is the way it mimics the folklore of old internet horror. The cursed games, the strange executables, the files that change after midnight. These stories work because they blur the line between fiction and user behavior. I'm Scared does the same thing interactively. It does not need you to believe that Whiteface is real forever. It only needs you to believe it for maybe a second, that maybe the game knows more than the game should. And that is enough, because once the game teaches you to distrust the border around it, every border after that starts to feel weak. The monitor becomes a window, the folder becomes a room, the desktop becomes part of the map, and the scariest thing about the game is no longer the monster chasing you with a white face. It's the realization that the monster understands where you actually are. Water Womb World might actually be one of the most quiet, deranged games on this list. It's short, simple, and mechanically almost humble. You explore the seafloor, catch some fish, sift through the silt, study objects in a lab, and try to find Eden. But that description sounds like archaeology, something you study in school. And Water Womb World is really not about archaeology. It's about the horror of faith when faith becomes evident hungry. The ocean in this game is not beautiful in a normal way. It's flat, pixelated, ancient, and oppressive, like a religious illustration scanned too many times until it becomes deceased. You aren't diving into adventure. You are descending into a theological wound. The protagonist's goal is to prove something impossible and sacred. Immediately give every tiny discovery a terrible weight. A fish is not just a fish. A fuel is not just a fuel. A piece of red matter is not just an object. Everything might be a sign. And that's where the game becomes so interesting. It captures the mindset of someone who has already decided what the truth is and now needs the world to confess. The player is asked to gather, catalog, and interrupt. On the surface, these are scientific actions, but the tone is devotional. The lab becomes a chapel, and the ocean floor becomes the scripture. Every artifact feels less like data and more like a relic pulled from the body of God. The forbidden feeling comes from the idea that some discoveries should remain undiscovered, not because they're false, but because they might be true in the worst way possible. A lot of cosmic horror uses the same structure. The human mind reaches towards the divine, and the divine answers by being biological, indifferent, and hungry. Water Womb World filters that through a low-resolution religious body horror. Eden's not just a garden in the clouds. It is something wet, something under pressure, something buried beneath the silt. And the theories can go in several directions. Is the protagonist uncovering the origin of humanity, or projecting obsession onto random objects? Is the sea a womb, a grave, or both? Are the creatures angels, mutations, or just life forms misread through a desperate religious lens? The game never cleans this up, which is why it lingers. It understands mystery dies when everything becomes a timeline. Instead, it gives you symbols and lets them rot in your head. What makes Water Womb World feel like a lost download is how little it tries to justify itself. It just arrives, shows you the entire nightmare cosmology in about 15 minutes, and leaves. There's no epic lore codex, no safe protagonist voice reminding you what to feel. It trusts the imaginary, the silence, that the player will understand the fear of finding exactly what they are looking for. And maybe that's the most disturbing part. In most horror, the character opens the wrong door by mistake. Here, The character wants the wrong door. They built their entire lives around finding it, so when the game finally suggests that Eden may be real, the feeling is not wonder, it's dread. Because if a paradise is a womb, then humanity is not fallen because it left heaven. Maybe humanity is terrifying because it was born from something that it was never supposed to see. Now we got the Doom wiki page, myhouse.wad, or more accurately, myhouse.pk3. One of the most famous examples of a game file pretending to be smaller than it actually is. The setup's almost laughably modest. Someone returns to a Doom form after years away and posts a map supposedly based on a friend's old house project. It's advertised like a simple tribute, a little nostalgic level, roughly 10 minutes of playtime, and then you play it. Then the house unfolds. At first, it really looks like just a house in Doom, a strangely normal space built inside a game famous for demons, key cards, and abstract industrial corridors. But that normality is the trap. The more you move through it, the more the house starts to revise itself. Rooms change, doors appear. Familiar areas return with details that were not there before. You leave, you re-enter, and realize the map is not progressing like a level. It is remembering it like a dream. This is one of the deepest kinds of digital horror because Doom maps are supposed to be knowable. Their geometry, sectors, line depths, secrets. Players have spent decades mastering the language of these spaces. My House takes that familiar language and uses it to create an impossible domestic architecture. Not impossible because the engine can't do it, but impossible because memories can't be trusted to preserve a home correctly. The deeper you go, the more the supposed tribute becomes a labyrinth of grief. There are mirrors, alternate versions of familiar spaces, airport terminals, bathroom houses, back rooms, empty parking lots, and endings that feel like emotional states rather than victory conditions. And surrounding the map is an entire layer of documents, photos, and journey material that makes the release feel less like a mod and more like an object somebody found after a tragedy. Whether you read that layer as a literal backstory, immersive fiction, or both, the effect is the same. The download folder becomes part of a haunted house. That is the secret of My House, the game. It's not just a map, it's a container for absence. The missing friend, old project, familiar home, distorted music, the way ordinary rooms become unreachable versions of themselves. The horror is not only that the house changes, it's that the house changes in the way memories change. A childhood room gets bigger, a hallway gets longer, a place you knew perfectly becomes strange because you are no longer the person who lived there. That's why My House is forbidden. Even after millions of people have watched videos about it, the presentation still mimics a private artifact. It does not feel like a polished release announcing its theme. It feels like opening a folder where the pieces do not quite belong together, and slowly realize the mess is arranging like a surgical precision. The game weaponizes the oldest internet fear, that a file can carry a history of you you're not prepared to inherit. And the theories run so deep because the house can be read as so many things at once. A grief maze, a relationship autopsy, a house of leaves inspired static curse, a comment on modding culture where personal memories are rebuilt inside ancient engines and are passed around as files. Or maybe, more simply, a story about how every attempt to preserve the past also mutates it. You can make a map of a house because you don't want to lose it. Then the map becomes the only version you have left, and it starts lying. In the end, My House does what all forbidden feeling games do. It makes the player feel like the discovery has a cost. You wanted to know how deep the house went. You wanted to see the secret areas. You wanted the good ending, the full explanation, the hidden truth. But the more completely you understand the space, the less innocence your curiosity feels. Because maybe some houses aren't puzzles. They're memorials. And maybe solving a memorial is just another way of disturbing the dead. So why do these games feel like you were never supposed to find them? It's not because they're actually inaccessible. Most of them are right there on a public page, public domain, waiting to be downloaded. The forbidden feeling comes from how they frame the act of playing. They make you feel like an intruder, a researcher, an archivist, a trespasser, or witness. These games don't welcome you into a story. They let you uncover the aftermath of one. That's the difference between scary games and the games that feel cursed. A scary game threatens you with a jump scare. A curse feeling game implicates you. It makes your curiosity part of the horror. Autonomy turns the house into a body. It makes you listen to autopsies. No Players Online turns an empty server into a graveyard for vanished players. I'm Scared turns your computer into part of a map. Waterroom World turns discovery into blasphemy. And My House turns a download folder into a memorial you can't stop opening. And that's what this video set out to solve. These games feel forbidden because they understand the internet itself is already haunted. Not by these mythical ghosts, but abandoned projects, dead usernames, half-remembered rooms, vanished communities, and files that outlived the people and the moments that created them. Indie horror, at its best, does not invent that fear, but it just leads to it, points at it. So the next time you find a little strange game with almost no descriptions, a few screenshots, and a download button sitting quietly at the bottom of the page, remember this: the scariest part may not be what's inside the file. It may be the fact that someone left it there for you to find.